Canadian housing starts rose last month, boosted by continued strength in apartments and condos. Housing starts came in at a seasonally adjusted annualized rate of more than 270,000 units. That's an 8% rise from the month before. Starts were up 98% in Montreal and 20% in Toronto. Well, when it comes to the push for more affordable housing, vacant home taxes are an effort to be considered and have been by some cities in this country. One was implemented in Toronto, and recently the city voted to increase it. But will increasing the tax actually increase its impact? Will we see more people putting their vacant homes up for sale or for rent? Let's bring in Tom Davidoff, associate professor at the Sauder School of Business at UBC, for some perspective on this. Tom, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So you've also been looking at this vacant home tax on the West Coast in the Vancouver area, and it's been in place longer there. How have you seen the impact of it unfold there and, the tax itself sort of, evolve?
Yeah, so most of the juice is squeezed out of the lemon in the first year, to the extent there were a lot of empty homes to begin with in Vancouver, which we don't know because we don't have the data before the tax. But since the tax has come in, like in Toronto, the count of homes that are declared vacant for the vacant home tax purposes and the speculation tax, which is similar at a provincial level, less than 1% of all homes.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting to not have the vacant home data before the tax goes into place, because then you don't really know. Did this actually inspire people perhaps to rent their house out or to sell their home or their condo or what have you, and get more housing onto the market? Is there some way that we can get a sense of that?
Yes, thank you. My colleague Sauder Somerville, doing some work for the province, estimated that, there's, I think, something like 10 to 15,000 extra rentals that sort of can't be explained except by the empty homes taxes in British Columbia. So it does seem like there's more apartments being rented out than there were previously. And the natural culprit for that, of course, is the empty homes and speculation tax. So it does seem like some units were freed up.
With the vacant homes tax in Toronto, it started at 1%, and now the city has voted to increase it to 3%. Does that have an impact? I mean, obviously, on anyone choosing to pay the tax, it means that the city is going to be bringing in more money. Do you think it is enough to change the behavior of some of these owners of vacant properties?
Yeah, at 3%, I'm not sure you want it to change behavior, because you're collecting, $30,000 a year on $1 million condo.
Right.
That might be more money than the city needs to pay to provide housing for somebody who's not able to find housing. And so, once you're at 3%, the beauty of taxing something you don't like empty homes, is either you correct the behavior or you raise a bunch of revenue. From Vancouver's experience, the small number of homes that were declared vacant, they're pretty sticky. Sometimes they get used the next year, but some of them are pretty sticky and last a while. So my guess is the effect of this tax increase will be more to raise extra revenue than bring some units online. But I do think the effect will be both. You'll see some extra units brought online and a bunch of revenue raised.
You've noted that in BC, some Airbnb operators have faked occupancy. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, from the audits that have been done, it doesn't seem like there's a huge amount of faking. The 1% declared vacant, I don't think is far from the actual vacancy in Vancouver. But somebody who rents the place, maybe lives there most of the year, some of the year, and then rents to Airbnb the rest of the time, that can be pretty hard, I think, for people to pick up. And as you may have seen, British Columbia has just passed some tougher laws on Airbnb that I believe go in effect next spring. And it will be interesting to see how many homes get sold all of a sudden or rented out relative to how many homes have declared vacant or speculation tax. And it would surprise me not very much at all to find that the number of Airbnbs sort of beaten out by these taxes and regulations might be fairly large relative to the vacancy counts.
Yeah, the federal government was pointing to the efforts in BC when it comes to those short-term rental properties and trying to limit, properties being used for short-term rentals that could have otherwise been long-term rentals. And the federal government being interested in perhaps exploring something along those lines. I don't know, Tom, if you have any thoughts about how the federal government would be able to, be involved in something like that. Someone one of our reporters suggested yesterday that maybe it would be one of the efforts that could be included in the Housing Accelerator Fund. So, if a city were to do this, when it comes to short-term rentals, then maybe they would be eligible for some of the money from the fund. I don't know if you think maybe they're onto something with that, or if there could be something else that the federal government could explore.
Yeah, I would say generally taxes are probably a better idea than bans. So to the extent there could be a national occupancy tax on Airbnb, that might be a good idea. For landlords, certainly in BC, and I suspect Toronto too, the rewards to doing Airbnb are very large relative to what you can collect in rent from just having a long-term tenant. So to address that gap, I think a tax would probably make sense. The other thing you could do to make sure homes get occupied, an idea I'm fond of is, and I've put forward elsewhere, is a alternative minimum tax. So we've calculated that between, say, Airbnb operators or people who bring wealth in from outside the market, so if you just taxed at, say, suppose you said your income tax has to be at least 1% of the value of your property. That's a floor on your income taxes. So if you've got $1 million home, you've got to pay $10K in income tax. Most people who actually own a home worth $1 million, of course, pay more than $10,000 a year in income tax because it would be hard to make the payments otherwise. Some people, though, don't. And if there's not an income tax from the address in question, you're going to owe $10K in extra tax. That would raise over $1 billion in Greater Vancouver and over $1 billion a year in Greater Toronto. So I do think in expensive markets, looking into that alternative minimum tax at every address, given property value, is probably the way to go, because that's going to really encourage use by people who already pay enough income tax to cover the bill.